Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For anybody who is this morning, if you can come up to the lectern and just press the button on the right-hand side, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
What, that one?
On the right-hand side, sorry. Get the other
That one?
The right-hand side.
That one?
Yeah.
So just press that. Switch off.
And if you don't switch it off, we can switch it off.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Okay, good morning everyone. First off, a health and safety announcement. There's no fire alarm drill anticipated today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the signs above the doors. Make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there until you're told it's safe to return. Finally, please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off, he says as he's doing so himself. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on Tuesday, the 3rd of September 2024. I'm your chair, Councillor Todd Olive. To my right is Vice Chair, Councillor Mike Howe. Supporting officers present are Ed Freeman, Assistant Director, Planning, Strategy and Development Management, Matt Dickens, Planning Policy Manager, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, and Debbie Meakin, Democratic Services Officer. Can I remind everyone present that this meeting is audio recorded for subsequent publication on the Council's website, so please can members and officers making a contribution to the meeting use a microphone or your comments will not be recorded. We will now start the meeting then by doing a roll call of committee members. Debbie, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can I start with yourself, please, Chair? Councillor Olive.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Howe.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jess Bailey has given apologies. Councillor, next on my list, Councillor Colin Brown.
Present.
I'll tick you as in. Thank you. We'll resolve that in a second. Councillor Bethany Collins has given her apologies. Councillor Oliver Davey, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Paula Fernley.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Hayward.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ben Ingham, please.
Present.
Thank you. We'll resolve that in a second. A little technical glitch there. Thank you very much. Councillor Jeff Young.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Yehudi Levine, good morning.
Good morning. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Parr.
Present.
Thank you. I can confirm that we're quorate today, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And for the benefit of members of the public, we have a new microphone system that today is the first time we're using it. So please bear with us if there are any hitches with the live feed on the screen. Hopefully you can at least hear everyone. Agenda item 1 then, apologies for absence, Debbie.
So, as said previously, I've received apologies from Jess Bailey and from Bethany Collins. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 then, the minutes of the previous meeting of Strategic Planning Committee on 6th of August 2024. Does anybody have any comments on those? Councillor Ingham? Okay, as chair then, I'll move the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of August 2024 as a true and accurate record. Members, please raise your hand if you're in agreement. Okay, then those are carried. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Debbie.
So, members, if you could please raise your hand if you, members of the committee, if you do have a declaration to make now, and then we'll move on to if there is anyone else in the room who needs to make a declaration. So rather than go through the names, if you need to make a declaration, can you raise your hand, please, Chair?
I think I'll declare on behalf of everyone in the room on every item that we've all been lobbied extensively by everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Noted. Do I have any other members in the committee who need to declare? I will take that as Councillor Davey.
Do we need to declare for town councillors?
I would say that that's not necessary in this case because
Oh.
you've already got that on your register of interest.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other members who happen to be in the room who are staying for us this morning who will need to declare an interest on this morning's? If you could step up to the public speaking microphone. Sorry to put you on the spot there, councillor, and I will make a note of your declaration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe it's an effects NRI as a member and planner of Exeter City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more, so Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Debbie. We come then to agenda item 4, public speaking on any of the matters not related to site allocations. I have here listed first Mr. Colin Dank and then Ms. Susie Culhane. Mr. Dank, are you with us?
Sorry, Chair, we said we didn't want to speak on this in the end, so we're just speaking on that tonight.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Culhane?
Hello. This is in relation to the report on the coastal preservation area and green wedge designation and the results of the public consultation. We have had, certainly in our community, and I read from the summary documents, it's been raised on several occasions, concerns about infrastructure capacity to meet the needs of future residents in the area. So I noticed that in your last minutes, you have some unspent SIL funding, which could possibly be used for this purpose. So my question is, what urgent measures does this council recommend to ensure infrastructure development will be prioritised?
I can add, in response to that, I'll come to Mr. Freeman in a moment, but you will see agenda item 7 in a few items' time, the notes of the SIL working party, where we are bringing forward a spend process for that 8 to 10 million that we have in the bank via the strategic infrastructure providers. Beyond that, I will come to Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Yes, as the Chair says, we have a SIL member working party who have established a process for spending of the SIL money. That process has commenced with us writing out to the main infrastructure providers identified within our infrastructure delivery plan, who are responsible for delivery to priority 1 projects. We've given them, I think it's 6 weeks to submit bids to us, with a view to reconvening the working group later in the year to consider those bids. But as things stand, yes, there's approximately £10 million of money there that can be accessed for infrastructure projects that help to deliver development coming forward in the district. So we look forward to receiving bids from infrastructure providers and considering them later in the year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Are there any other items of public speaking, Debbie?
No, that's it for this stage, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, then, we move to agenda item 5, matters of urgency. I have none listed. Has that changed?
No, there are none, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 6, to agree any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded. Again, I believe there are none.
Again, none, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We move then to agenda item 7, notes of the Community Infrastructure Levy Working Party held on the 1st of August. That's pages 24 to 25 of your agenda paper, members. Are there any questions or comments on those minutes? No? Okay, in which case then as Chair, I now move the minutes of the SIL Working Party held on the 1st of August as a true and accurate record. Members, please raise your hand if you're in support. Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much, members. We then move to agenda item 8, a report on our housing requirements. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So this first report is a bit of scene setting really for the rest of the day in terms of this talks about the housing requirements that needs to be met through the local plan and through the allocations that you'll be discussing starting later on this agenda and through the meetings later this month. So members will recall at our last meeting in August there was discussion around the requirements of the new draft National Planning Policy Framework, which is out to consultation at the moment. and the transitional arrangements. And the conclusion of that meeting was that we need to progress the local plan under those transitional arrangements with a requirement of at least 946 homes per year. Now, this is based on the transitional arrangements that enable us to develop a plan that is no more than 200 dwellings below the new requirement figure that's coming through in the National Planning Policy Framework of 1,146 dwellings per annum. So the consequence of not progressing the local plan within those transitional arrangements, which require us to publish a Regulation 19 version of the plan within 1 month of the government publishing the new National Planning Policy Framework, would be an increase in our housing numbers of at least 200 homes per year. So it's very important that we progress the plan as quickly as possible, with expectations that the new National Planning Policy Framework will be released sometime, I would imagine, between mid-October and the end of the year. So that's a key issue that I'd ask members to bear in mind as we move forward today in terms of decision making on allocations and the need to progress the plan to those figures. Now, obviously, in terms of the total requirement figure for the plan, that is basically the annualised figure of at least 946 homes over the years of the plan. Now, the government policy says that the plan has to cover a minimum of 15-year period. And obviously, we started off planning over a period of 2020 to 2040. But obviously, as work's progressed and time has gone on, we now envisage that adoption of the local plan won't now be until mid to late 2026. So the first recommendation in this report is that in order to have the plan that's at least 15 years in lifespan from adoption, that we amend the time period of the plan, so a plan end date of March 2042 is recommended. So therefore the new local plan would cover the period 2020 to 2042. Now, as I say, in terms of the housing requirement figure, there's this need to meet this figure of at least 946 dwellings and significant consequences if we don't. We also feel as officers that there's a need to build in some supply headroom. Now, this is to take account of the fact that not all sites will necessarily come forward within the timescales that we're envisaging. So we have within the plan that's currently adopted, and it is standard practice within local plans to build in some headroom to enable some sites that don't come forward and to give the market some choice in terms of what's delivered. This also builds in some resilience into our 5-year housing land supply calculations, which members will be aware of is quite critical in the long run through the life of the plan, that we make sure that we can maintain a 5-year housing land supply position and the default position of the presumption in favour of sustainable development doesn't kick in. So application of the 10% headroom would raise the annualised provision to 1,041 dwellings, but as they would ensure the supply flexibility and longevity post-adoption of the plan. There is currently an issue in terms of delivering that 10% supply position. As things stand, based on the recommendations within the reports before you today and reports that are coming to you later this month, we only have a headroom position of 1.2% or 253 dwellings. So members need to bear that in mind. I would suggest as we move forward the allocations that we're looking to consider today and at future meetings, that there isn't a great deal of headroom within the plan as things stand, and that's something that we need to try and address as we move forward. A small word of comfort on that point, though, is that the National Planning Policy Framework does allow us to identify what's described as broad locations for growth for meeting housing supply in later years of the plan period. So there is an option to say that in the latter years of the plan, we don't necessarily need allocations, but we need broad locations for where growth and those allocations would be coming forward in the future. I don't consider that to be a desirable way forward, but it's a fallback if we can't deliver the necessary allocations. I would suggest we need to keep that very much to a minimum, and ideally just for the additional 2 years of the plan period that we're adding into this process. Given that we were working to the 946 homes per year figure in the previous iteration of the plan, the draft local plan that members will recall went out to consultation at the end of 22 and into early 23. In terms of those broad locations for growth, it's important to bear in mind that the local plan has strategic policies within it which set out that strategy. I think that's potentially giving us indications of broad locations for growth based around the principal centre of Exmouth and the main centres, local centres and service villages within the settlement hierarchy. But again, I think if possible, it would be good to be more precise in terms of those locations for growth if we're going down that route. Just finally, in terms of this report, I'd just highlight in terms of the local plan evidence work that's ongoing. I'm sure we're going to hear lots of concern about infrastructure. I think we already have from one speaker, particularly in terms of issues such as wastewater infrastructure, which I know are particular concerns among the community at the moment. Members will be aware that in July you had a meeting, a presentation from consultants producing a water cycle study for the council on that issue, and we've subsequently met with South West Water and are working with them to understand the position and understand what actions need to be taken to improve the infrastructure and deliver that in step with development coming forward through this plan. These are issues that should not, however, impact on where sites are to be allocated in the district. We have relatively few options in this regard, as members will be aware, and in any event, planning does not have control over wastewater infrastructure. All we can do is phase the delivery of development in line with the required enhancements being delivered by South West Water. So it's not about so much where development goes and the scale of development, it's about the phasing of when that comes forward, and we're working with South West Water to understand how they intend to deliver the infrastructure and what timescales so that we can do that. In terms of wider infrastructure, there is an infrastructure delivery plan in production as well. Members will be aware we have an IDP that dates back to 2017 that is currently being updated, and we're consulting with key stakeholders so we understand the infrastructure that's needed to deliver the local plan and understand what funding is available and how that can be delivered. So that is work in progress, which will be brought to members at a future meeting. So just turning back to the recommendations, then you'll see there are 3 recommendations to this report. The first is that the Strategic Planning Committee agreed to extend the end date of the new local plan period by 2 years to the year 2042. The Strategic Planning Committee agreed the emerging local plan total housing requirement, which is 20,812 dwellings, but is currently short of the officer recommended figure for an additional 10% of supply headroom. And 3, that Strategic Planning Committee note that the emerging local plan housing requirement can be met subject to agreement on site allocations at this and future meetings of the Strategic Planning Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. In the usual order of business then, are there any questions from members of committee? Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. On recommendation 2, if we were to approve as printed, we've got 10% there, which could be used against us in the future because it suggests your intent is 10%. If we ratify that, the inspector could at a later date say, well, that's what you said in September 2024. So I'm cautious about that. I do like what Mr. Freeman said about perhaps being more flexible later on during the time period.
Is there a question here, Councillor Ingham? Sorry.
Well, yes, my question is, why are we putting that in if it's just an observation? Because this is about recommendations. I'd rather that was taken out as part of the recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Freeman, why is that in there? And is it a problem potentially in the future if it remains?
It's in the recommendation to highlight to members that we are currently short of that 10% headroom, which I'm recommending is something we should try and achieve through the plan. Whether it's noted in the recommendation or not, that issue will still remain. It's whether or not members want to formally note that as part of the recommendations. That's up to members. Really, it's there to just flag up the importance of that headroom.
Yes.
With that in mind, I'd like to propose those recommendations.
Should we finish questions,
Okay.
Councillor? Councillor Young?
Yeah, the question is, I think we've got a headroom at the moment on our local plan. And what is that? And also, is it normal practice with other local authorities to have a headroom of 10%? I believe at one time we were looking at 20%. So, no. Is 10% the right one? Is 5% the right one? Or something else?
Mr. Freeman.
I would say yes, it is normal practice to build in some headroom. As I say, you can't rely on the fact that every site is going to be delivered during the plan period and it's going to deliver in the timescales expected. You've obviously got windfalls, which also is built into these calculations. So you can't rely on windfalls being your headroom. We're building in headroom as well. I think it is good practice. It's common practice, I would say, in terms of plans. Generally, you tend to have sort of 10 to 20%. So the 10% is on the lower end of the headroom I think we should be aiming for. And I think it's particularly important, as members will be aware, in terms of maintaining a 5-year housing land supply position, having that flexibility within the housing figures. It builds a more resilient 5-year housing land supply position in the future. So that's the main reason for doing it. In terms of the current local plan, I'm sure there was headroom built into that. I couldn't say off the top of my head how much though.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any further questions? Okay, we move to debate then. I'm guessing there's going to be a hand on my left from Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I'd only want to put a proposal if there's no more debate. My intent is not to stifle that, but if others were minded, I just think it's unnecessary to put in the 10%. Totally agree with what Mr. Freeman is saying, that you have to have some headroom, whether that's 1.5%, I think you said currently, 5, 10 or 20. But I'm just cautious about someone quoting at us sometime in the near future. You said 10% and you're on 1.5. What are you going to do about it? I wouldn't want that. I'm quite happy for all of us to say perhaps it's 10% and agree that informally in committee, but that's different from putting it in black and white.
Okay, does anybody else wish to speak on this point, or do we take that proposal from Councillor Ingham? Councillor Arrow?
I actually think the opposite. We should set ourselves the ambition of 10%. It is really dangerous, and having twice now gone through the state of not having a 5-year housing land supply, and again, you've got to remember the two things are different. We need to have some headroom to try and avoid putting the council in future years back into the situation of going, I know Mr. Freeman will actually correct me, but a free fall for developers, because that's effectively what you end up with if we don't achieve it. So to strive at this point, that's all we're doing. And no, they can't quote us saying you should have had a 10%. Although it's exactly that. You should have had a 10%. We should strive to get a 10%. But it is about 5-year housing land supply is what you're referring to, which is a separate bit, which is when we're not achieving the builder rates we need to do. So I think it should be staying in. I'm happy to propose that if there wasn't a seconder for the first motion. Yeah.
I'm not sure the first motion was formally made. So if you want to, no. So if you want to propose that, the recommendations.
I am happy to propose the recommendations as they stand.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Devine. Okay. Does anybody wish to speak? No? Okay. In which case, Mr. Hunter, could you take us to a vote, please?
Certainly, Chairman. Thank you. All those in favour of the proposal, if you could raise your hands, please. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, can you raise your hands a little bit higher? Thank you very much. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. 5, 6, 7. All those against? 2, 3. Any abstentions? 1. Okay, that's carried then, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. And Mr. Hunter. In which case then, we come to the moment that you've all been waiting for. Agenda item 9, housing requirement and site allocations for Exmouth and surrounding areas. And I will come to Mr. Dickens to start us off.
Thank you, Chairman. This item on the agenda will consider the settlements of Exmouth, Lympstone, Woodbury, Exton, Budleigh, Salterton, Otterton and East Budleigh. So we will run through them in those orders. It's important to stress and repeat after the previous item that we do need to allocate sites in the local plan to meet housing numbers. So this report is very much about officer recommendations on sites to allocate in the plan. We will start with Exmouth, and I just wanted to give a bit of an overview of some of the key themes about Exmouth to set the strategic scene. So, as members will be aware, it sits at the top of the settlement hierarchy in our assessment work for the local plan. It's a town with a significant number of services, and this has helped inform recommendations on allocations. We recognise that the sites that have been promoted in Exmouth are largely on the edge of the settlement, with the town centre being in the bottom left corner of Exmouth. So that is a challenge. It is an issue that we do appreciate. But it is a settlement that is appropriate for higher level growth because of the strategic work and the assessment work we've undertaken. It's also probably worth referencing that Exmouth in particular has a very high affordable housing need, and one of the key mechanisms to deliver affordable housing is to deliver market housing, with the affordables being a proportion of that. In respect to Exmouth, I'd flag up that there are 4 sites in Brixton Ward that we've effectively grouped together. We will run through these individually, but we've grouped them together in recommendations as an allocation because they form a larger scale area for growth, which is appropriate to look at in totality, although, as I said, they will be flashed up as separate sites. And the other issue I'd flag up, as reflected in the committee report, is that whilst site 20A, which is a large site on the eastern side of the town, is not proposed as an allocation in the recommendations, we have had discussions with prospective developers, interested land parties in respect to a larger scale site. And I know through previous work there has been some support expressed for this as a development option in the town. So hopefully that is something of a scene setting. We will move on to presentations around the sites in order, as I said, starting with Exmouth. But as you'll see, there is a recommendation that the sites that we put forward are put forward as allocations in the local plan when we go through to the Regulation 19 version. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dickens. For members' benefit then, just to highlight some advice that we've had from legal in terms of how we go through these procedurally and vote. The advice we've had is that we should only be voting on the sites that we wish to recommend as allocations. If we don't want to see them go forward as a recommended allocation, then we simply move on. So if members wish to make a proposal that we don't allocate a site, then the appropriate proposal is that we move to the next site rather than that we reject it. Is that clear to everyone? Councillor Ingham.
Chair, thank you. What if there is a site recommended to go forward and we disagree with it?
The same applies. We simply vote to move on and we don't allocate it.
But we can discuss it?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
yes.
okay, I was worried.
Yeah, we just don't vote to reject it. The issue is if we find we don't have enough at the end of the process, and we've already voted to reject all of the ones that we haven't voted to allocate, then we've tied ourselves in a bit of a legal knot that would be difficult to unpick. So that's the basis of the advice that we've had. Okay then, and with a deep breath, we'll start first up with site reference Exmouth 50. Mr. Dickens.
Thank you, Chair. So actually, just before we get there, a bit of scene setting. There was a logical process that we followed in site assessment work. So it was a process set out in this flow chart. It starts with site identification. We've done some sifting, assessment, site selection. And it's important to reiterate that the choices of allocation, the recommendations are a product of looking at housing requirements. So we again go back to this number of 946 homes a year that we need to accommodate in East Devon.
It also is a top-down component looking at the spatial strategy. So we're looking at the hierarchy and the work that has informed that. And if you like, the bottom-up element is the more rigorous site assessment and looking at the individuals of the site. So on that basis, starting with Exmouth, you'll see a plan that gives you an overview of the sites that we have looked at and we'll come on to. But we start with a site in the town centre-ish location, Exmouth Police Station. It's a product of the police rationalising their operations and expressing a desire to see some redevelopment on this site. So that is Exmouth 50.
Okay, we have one public speaker registered, Andrew Tierman on behalf of Escape Exmouth, and I believe we have a statement to be read out by Ms Meakin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is a statement from Andrew Tierman on behalf of Escape Exmouth, and it reads as follows. Escape would like to thank the Chair and members of the Council for the opportunity to share this statement, which is speaking to Exmo 50, but also applies to all other proposals that will feed wastewater to Mare Lane Treatment Works, Exton, Lympston, Exmouth and Budleigh Salterton. Between 2011 and 2021, the population in East Devon saw the second highest growth in the southwest of 13.8%, now 150,800. Since privatisation of the water industry in 1989, the East Devon population has grown by 28%, yet many of the permits for wastewater treatment still remain at levels set in 1993. The original Exeter and East Devon Water Report of 2010 showed that Mare Lane Wastewater Treatment Works was over its permitted capacity by some 2,500 households. The report was predicated on building a new treatment works in East Devon, which has never materialised. Can South West Water be trusted to complete plans to upgrade Mare Lane? South West Water has repeatedly refused to share the consented dry weather flow rates for Mare Lane treatment works, but has previously stated that capacity is available. However, as councillors will be aware, sewage pollution alerts are a regular feature in Exmouth under non-exceptional conditions. One example, last March, after less than 4 millimetres of rain over 2 hours, the Mare Road CSO spilled sewage into the sea for over 56 hours. We asked South West Water for details of the spill, but they refused for over a year until Escape appealed to the first tier tribunal court and forced them to share the information. Water UK, the industry trade body, claims that the current proposed settlement figure from Ofwat for the period 2025 to 2030 is insufficient to improve the water infrastructure and puts the planned 1.5 million houses at risk. That's a quote from David Henderson, CEO, Water UK, on Radio 4 on the Today programme on the 28th of August 2024. Exmouth's sewer infrastructure is in a perilous state. It has failed a number of times in recent months at Fear Park, Imperial Road, and most recently Mare Road with do not swim notices over the last 3 weekends. South West Water plans to increase pump capacity to move more sewage to the treatment works, yet the rising mains are clearly at capacity and the increase is repeatedly leading to bursts, failure of the network and damage to the town and tourist economy. Even with the planned doubling of Mare Lane capacity, South West Water acknowledged that this will only treat up to 60% of storm flows. The planned expansion will not manage the current requirements and certainly not future expansion. In conclusion, Escape does not believe that the Mare Lane Wastewater Treatment Works has the capacity for the plans proposed for Exmouth and the other sites in the catchment. South West Water has plans to upgrade capacity at Mare Lane, but this is not likely to be completed until 2028 or later. South West Water predicts more spills from the Mare Lane CSO until the upgrade is completed. In 2023, Ofwat highlighted South West Water as the second worst in the country for completion of wastewater improvement works, underspending by over 60%, so there is little confidence the upgrade will be delivered before 2030. Given the population increase, the information presented in the 2010 water report, previous broken commitments from South West Water, the East Devon District Council motion of no confidence in South West Water, and ongoing issues, Escape recommends planning development is refused until South West Water carries out a full review led by an independent expert. Then for South West Water to produce and deliver a fit-for-purpose sewage infrastructure for Exmouth and its future residents. That's a statement from Escape. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Slightly more than 3 minutes, but given the importance of the issue, there we go. I'm not going to do this for every item of public speaking, but I think in virtue of the significance of the issue, I should come to Mr. Freeman for a response to that one.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've got consultants working on what's called a water cycle study, which considers issues about wastewater infrastructure. And members received a presentation a few weeks ago from them, so they continue to work for us and with South West Water to address and understand these issues. I think, as I said earlier, a lot of this is about the timing at which development comes forward, given that we're talking about a local plan with a 15-year lifespan. During that timescale, issues of lack of capacity in terms of wastewater infrastructure that exists now will be addressed, and potentially other issues will come forward during that timescale. So while we understand the concerns that are being expressed and share them to a large extent with the current situation that we see on the ground, I don't think it really affects the decisions today in terms of sites and allocations. It's about when those sites and allocations come forward, which would be controlled through the planning application process. And members will be aware we have a system whereby we can impose what are called Grampian planning conditions, which would potentially allow planning permission to be granted for development, but say that no homes can be occupied until the infrastructure that's required to support that development, in this case wastewater infrastructure, has been put in place and delivered, so that we ensure that we're not overloading the system any more than it already is. And really that's the only powers we have as a local planning authority to address these issues. While I understand the concerns that are being expressed and to a large extent share them, I don't think they really have a large bearing on discussions for today in terms of sites and allocations in a plan which, as I say, has a 15-year delivery timescale, during which time that position is likely to change. But we'll continue to work with South West Water and try and align sites coming forward with the infrastructure that's needed to support them coming forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. I have no other public speakers registered to speak, so we come then to committee, and I've seen Councillor Davey first.
Well, this one's in my ward, and so I have the honour of being the first speaker on site allocations. Unfortunately for me, it's a relatively uncontentious one. It's right in the middle of Exmouth. It's in very, very good access to a range of services. So I have no hesitation in bringing it forward. The only query, I note that the report suggests that it could accommodate more homes. And I think everybody who in Exmouth would like to see these being affordable, preferably for young people. And so I have a question: can we put any kind of limitation on what kind of homes are built here? And can we somehow resist having this made into a site for retirement homes, like the Jewson site we had recently? I'm sure the answer is going to be no, but I've got to say it anyway. Well, I might change my mind in a few years' time anyway, and wish I'd gone for it. But it would be nice if we were somehow able to control what kind of housing comes forward on this site, because much as I appreciate that we need retirement homes and sheltered housing and so on, I wouldn't want to see it on this particular site. Thank you.
Subject to an answer to your question then, was that a proposal, Councillor Davey?
Yes, I'm happy to propose acceptance of this site.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Brian Bailey. Mr. Freeman, did you want to come back to Councillor Davies' question?
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Davey answered his own question, but I mean, I think the challenge here is that there is a recognised need for retirement housing as well. So it's going to be very difficult to justify precluding that from a site like this, which, as you point out, is probably in a prime location for that sort of housing. But our own local housing needs assessment identifies quite a significant need for retirement housing that will need to be met on some of these sites. So I think it would be difficult to justify actually precluding it from this site.
Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Davey. My gut reaction was only 20. You know, it is irresponsible. And depending on who the landowner, I would suggest there's a moral obligation to do the right thing rather than the greedy thing. And yes, at least double that number is achievable, if not more. So I'm going to support Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. I sense a letter to Commissioner Hernandez coming on, perhaps. In any event, Mr. Hunter, could you take us through a vote on this site, please?
Certainly, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Bailey, I didn't see you.
I take issue with Mr. Freeman, unfortunately. Oh, well, this might work, it might not. It is, that's right. I take issue with Mr. Freeman. I think, being an Exmouth councillor for the ward of Litnam, Exmouth is desperate for housing for young people. And I support Ollie entirely in this fact that we're inundated with elderly people. I can say that because I am one. You know, so it's not, I'm not being disrespectful to anyone. But the future is the young people, and the young people in Exmouth are living with their parents, living with their brothers and sisters. Houses overcrowded because there is no affordable homes available. This 20% cheaper than market price is a load of absolute rubbish, because in Exmouth, as in with most of East Devon, the average wage would not respond to buying a house at the average price, which is about $350, something like that. So it's not going to work. So I think if you could, in your heart, Mr. Freeman, find a way round, I know it's in there somewhere, find a way round this situation that we could do what Councillor Ollie Davey wants to do, which I'm totally in support of, and put a restraint on this. I've been speaking to Alison Amanda, who's very keen to get this done, because she's at the moment technically the owner of the land, and she's very keen to get the affordable homes in there and to get her police station modernised and open to the public, which would be a great thing for Exmouth, rather than another McCarthy and Stone or something like that, which just had a huge run at Tesco's, which has taken all our employment land. So we don't want to be known for being full of retirement homes. And that's where at the moment, we're retirement homes and charity shops and sewerage, which is not much to be known for a town of Exmouth, you know, and these things have got to be addressed. So it's more than just, well, you know, we'll wait and see. I'm sure you can do it, and I've got every confidence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. I think I'll answer on Mr. Freeman's behalf that the point is heard very much, and what we can do, we will. The problem is simply that is not very much. With that being said then, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, all those in favour of including this particular site in the draft regulation plan, if you can raise your hands, please. Is that unanimous? Lovely, saves me counting, thank you.
I suspect possibly one of the only unanimous decisions we may have today, but we will see. In that case, that brings us on to site number 2, Exmouth 03, which is not proposed for allocation.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, a small site which has limited capacity to accommodate development should it be allocated, but it's not recommended.
Okay, we have no public speakers registered for this one. Does anybody on committee wish to speak? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I live just around the corner from this site, and I see it's recommended not to be allocated, and I can agree with that, because it's a very small site in a cul-de-sac at the rear of the garden centre, and I would say we'd go with officer's recommendation. I'd like to put that forward. Thank you, Chair.
Just a reminder, we don't need to vote not to allocate. If we're not allocating, we can just move on with no speakers. And in view of the time, we may want to do that on some of these. But no, of course, appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Are there any other speakers? No? Okay, in which case we move on then to site reference Exmouth 23.
A site on the northern edge of Exmouth, recommended as an allocation for 12 dwellings.
I have Councillor Tim Dumper registered to speak for this site.
We're still on the normal system, are we, for this? Good. Am I getting an echo? No. Just sounds like it here. Yeah. This particular site, I would like to speak against it, partly because of the coastal protection area, which is actually mentioned on screen there, but also because it forms part of the channel, the link, if you like, between Exmouth and Lympstone. We have been anxious over the years to prevent coalescence between the two settlements, and I'm sure my colleagues from Lympstone will take this up when they speak of Lympstone 07, which of course is the site opposite. It is a fairly small site, but it exemplifies in my mind the 30s problem of ribbon development. We had ribbon development going up Exeter Road and then down Cortlands Lane. And what we're trying to do with Exmouth 23 here is to infill. Now, National Trust, as we know, acquired the land of Lower Halsden Farm, and this site is an important link across from the National Trust land. And I would appeal that as it's only 12 dwellings, that the committee actually rejects this as a site for development. I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment. Infrastructure is obviously relevant in this case, but that is being discussed and will be discussed further, I'm sure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dumper. I've got no other speakers then, so we come to committee. Members of committee wish to speak? I'm aware Councillor Ingham had asked. It's not in Lympstone Parish, so I will. It's not in Lympstone Parish, though. I'm aware it's adjacent. It's not in Lympstone Parish. We had to be very strict on this. No exceptions. Inside committee then, Councillor Ingham.
Yes, Chair. Councillor Dumper spoke well. He mentioned that if you're as old and as wrinkly as he is and I am, then you'll have done geography O-level field trips about ribbon development, and this is a prime example. And we wouldn't want to exacerbate that by joining up the dots along Cortlands Lane. And as you know, there's the coastal protection area is relevant, and I feel as we seem to be embracing a continuity with regard to green wedges in coastal protection areas from one old plan to the emerging plan, then I feel it is correct to recognise the location of that site and to reject it. So I agree with Councillor Dumper.
Councillor Young.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Dumper on this allocation. It shouldn't go forward. It's down a very narrow lane. It's already busy because there's a hotel down there. Lympstone Parish Council doesn't support it, nor does the Town Council. So I think we should move on from this one.
Was that a proposal to move on to the next site, Councillor Young? Is there a seconder? Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Davey?
Yeah, I was just going to put a counter view actually. It is infill, as Councillor Dumper stated. There are houses down there, they're mostly large, well set back from the road. It's not publicly accessible land, so I'm not quite sure what Councillor Dumper means about it being a valuable link, unless it's seen as a wildlife corridor or something like that. I really find it quite hard to see the harm in a small development on that site. But I'm willing to be corrected by those who know it better than I do. I don't usually walk that far. I walk down as far as the East Devon Way and then join that.
Did we have a seconder for Councillor Young's proposal? Sorry, yes, Councillor Ingham. I have Councillor Howard to speak next.
Yeah, I take a contrary view to the proposer and seconder, unfortunately. We are at dire straits of housing numbers. And if we take every category, green belt, green wedge, coastal preservation zone, and take all of those out, we won't have a 5-year housing supply, we won't have a local plan or anything else. It is quite simple, the numbers. There are challenges to be had. There are a number of sites could be questionable, but a small infill gap between an already developed line of houses is not one of those fights we should be having. It is quite simple, and it should be recommended for approval or to go through as part of our local plan. Thank you.
Do we have any further speakers on this point? Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. I can only agree with Councillor Howe. Some of these battles we're going to have are incredibly contentious. This just appears to continue what's already there. And I appreciate there'll be some local opposition, but we're looking at this from a district level. And infilling 12 properties into this space just seems logical. Thank you.
Councillor Bailey.
This site is on a single track road which comes out at Cortlands Junction, which is exceedingly busy most of the day until quite late in the evening. And with the next one coming on with a proposal of 100 dwellings, these are unsustainable on traffic issues alone. And the fact there's no pavement, that people are going to move into these houses with young children who have to go to school, which is a long walk, so they have to go by car, so it's adding to the traffic problems, and I don't think it's sustainable or the one in the future, the one behind it. So I can't support this, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay, any further speakers? No, okay, in which case we have a proposal to move on to the next item. Will take us to a vote if nobody else wishes to speak.
Proposal to accept this site.
No, proposal to move on to the next item.
Sorry, I thought it was Councillor Davey. I thought it was.
No, Councillor Young proposed that we move to the next item, seconded by Councillor Ingham. Okay, in that case then, those in favour of the motion to move on to the next item and to not allocate. I see 4 in favour. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Any abstentions? No. Okay, in which case the proposal falls. Do we have any other proposals? Councillor Howe.
Yes, to allocate as per offers.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hayward. Okay. Those in favour of allocating the site? Six, I count. Yep. Against? 5. Councillor Brown, could nice and high, please. 5. Any abstentions? No, okay, the proposal is carried. We move then to site Limpston 07.
So in this instance, we're crossing the road to Cortlands Cross, Limpston 07, a larger site with a recommendation for allocation for 100 dwellings. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we have a fair few public speakers registered for this one. Ms Culhane, we have you first, and then Ms Diamond.
Hi. The Limpstone community do not understand the justification for recommending this site for allocation. It's very clearly in the coastal preservation area, and planning has been refused historically in order to maintain the separation between Limpstone and Exmouth. There is also some opposition within the community to the proposal to move the Limpstone boundary in order for this site to be counted as an Exmouth allocation. The landscape assessment in your document states that the site has an open character comprising of large fields that are particularly visible in views from the north and the west. It's notable that the site is located within the existing green wedge in the current East Devon local plan, and any development would erode the physical separation between Exmouth and Limpstone. The site itself has a mixture of an urban fringe and countryside feel with development to southern and western boundaries. The development of the site would extend the built form of Exmouth into open countryside areas. The site has provision for 100 houses, which at the Office of National Statistics average of roughly 2 people and 2 cars per household, means 200 extra cars using single-track Devon lanes to access services, and 200 extra people, an increase of 20% on the current Limpstone population. The site is agricultural and close to the XS3SSI. There is no evidence of a water quality risk assessment. The site drains outside of the Wottonbrook catchment, but into a small stream flowing into the XS3 through a wetland, all vulnerable to pollution from a development of this size. In view of the above, development on this site will be difficult to make sustainable. In conclusion, this site should not be allocated, but if it is, a robust surface water treatment system must be required. Provision must be made to ensure the treatment system is maintained, and a temporary surface water treatment system must be developed before construction work commences. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Worth mentioning that some of those things at the end would be items that we pick up at planning stage rather than here, but point taken. Ms Diamond.
This site was deemed to be unsuitable for development by a planning inspector following a week-long public inquiry in 2012. Some of the reasons for rejecting the site have been reduced because of subsequent actions by the owners. The creation of an earth bank blocking views from the East Devon Way, the establishment of a belt of trees on the northern boundary, albeit conifers rather than the native tree planting promised in the landscaping plan. In addition, easy access to the site can now be provided using the roundabout being created at the junction of the Deanan Way and the A376. However, the inspector's concerns regarding the erosion of the integrity of the green wedge that separates Exmouth and Limpstone are still valid. As he concluded, the development of this site would considerably damage the setting and individual identity of Limpstone. As far as the expansion of Exmouth is concerned, this is a better site than 09 and 10A, with direct access to the A376. The site selection report notes that in view of the distance from facilities in Exmouth, residents would be more dependent on the limited facilities in Limpstone. This needs to be borne in mind when considering the overall allocation of sites in the parish.
Okay, thank you. I have Ms Francis for Limpstone Parish Council.
We cannot understand Limpstone 7's journey from being a second choice site to preferred and now recommended for allocation. When the agenda pack states land north of Cortlands was highlighted as being a very unpopular choice for development. There is also contradiction in the site selection report, which states, on account of matters to include landscape and heritage constraints, this site is not identified as appropriate for allocation for development. How can this site seriously be considered when your own paperwork shows it was not recommended by your own officers? This site is in the coastal protection area. It has sensitive ecology of the estuary in close proximity and must be further evidence not to allocate. This site received the joint highest opposition during our last public consultation and has already been the subject of a public inquiry finding against development. That ruling was hard won and very dear to the hearts of Livingston residents. Part of it stated that 400 metres green space should be left to prevent coalescence. As recently as 2022, an appeal for just one dwelling was refused. When planning decisions have consistently resisted, and if you allocate today, coalescence will become a reality and a very sad day for our village. Previous rulings against development have also highlighted the unsuitability of Cortlands Lane for increased vehicle traffic and the danger to pedestrians using it to access the village centre. Cortlands Lane is narrow with few passing places, it has no footways and is unlit. It is madness to have such increased traffic and footfall. Even if a new access point was punched through a mature hedge and bank off of the new Deanham Way extension junction, giving cars better access to the site, to get to the village centre, cars would still have to use Cortlands Lane or go out onto the A376 and in at the Saddler's Arms, which is already a severe pinch point. A new access would not solve the problem of pedestrians having to walk to the village centre and school along dangerous lanes or through fields via unpaved, unlit public footpaths, which are often impassable during wet weather anyway. The parish council were disturbed to learn that there have already been meetings between the developer and Livingston Football Club about the possibility of a dedicated facility within the site. However, experience has shown what is sometimes promised or planned in the very early stages does not always come to pass, so these grounds are unsound. When you weigh the need to achieve a target number of houses, please consider our concerns and arguments very carefully, as these fields are the green wedge recommended by the public inquiry and keep us a village properly separate from Exmouth.
Sorry, could you just turn the microphone off? Thank you. I have Councillor Young next.
All I will add is I totally agree with all three speakers. Absolutely. Thank you.
Councillor Ingham. You are strictly supposed to go to the public speaking lectern, yes.
Oh, that's I do support what's been said before, and so I'm going to list those reasons why I think it should not be considered. The main deal being that it was refused at a public hearing, and that was at appeal, and yes, there was reference made to the damage to Lympstone Parish and of course Lympstone Village, undermining the green wedge, which is very significant. The coastal protection area, access and its unsustainability as a site because it is so far from the centre of Lympstone and the centre of Exmouth. It's not anywhere near the built-up area boundary. It's in open countryside. It's adjacent to a Grade 1 listed building and wall, which also were referred to at the public hearing. It would have a very negative effect on Lympstone Manor. And you may say, well, so what? Well, there aren't too many Michelin star hotels, restaurants in East Devon. In fact, it's the only one. So that has a negative effect on its economic sustainability of the area, which we should be protecting. the community, as you've just heard, of Lympstone and Exmouth are diametrically opposed to this site being developed. The Lympstone neighbourhood plan was certainly against this, and so if you are minded to approve this, you're flying in the face of the intent of the Localism Act, in my opinion. And it would increase the risk to pedestrians and cyclists using Cortlands Lane and the pedestrians, hikers using East Devon Way. I'm very disappointed that this one has come forward as it is. I find it hard to believe that we can fly in the face of a public opinion in the way we do. Thank you.
Councillor Ingham, I appreciate that you've not declared an interest in relation to this site, but clearly you've predetermined the application because you've said here it's unsustainable, it's not near a development boundary, it's in the open countryside, it will have a negative effect on Lympstone Manor. So in my view, you've predetermined this matter. So I don't think that you should be voting in relation to this particular site being included in the local plan. You should leave that up to your colleagues to decide whether that's appropriate.
No, I disagree. I'm representing my community and they expect me to do that. I've checked them before on that. Woodbury Parish and Lympstone Parish, they expect me to speak on their behalf.
Councillor, you're perfectly entitled to speak on their behalf. That's absolutely fine. And as you say, that's what they will expect you to do. But obviously, from what you've said, it appears to me, and I think anybody who's a reasonable person who would have heard that, is that you've made your decision already that you don't think that this is a suitable site. On that basis, you shouldn't be taking part as a member of this committee voting upon it, having already made your mind up before you've heard everything today.
No.
So I don't think that it's appropriate for you to take part in the vote in this particular application. You can then, in relation to the other sites that you haven't spoken about, that's my advice to you. You can ignore my advice. You may then get a complaint in relation to your conduct to the monitoring officer, which you'll have to deal with. It is your choice. Ultimately, I'm here to give you advice. My advice is I believe you've predetermined this, so don't vote. It's your choice now.
Thank you.
Okay. Committee members. Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask Matt something? On page 72, it said, should the site be allocated? Yes. Reasons for allocating, the site is not identified as appropriate for allocation but for development. What have I got wrong?
Yes, I meant to come to Mr. Freeman on this point, but as you've been named, Mr. Dickens?
Sorry, can you repeat the line again?
It said, should the site be allocated? Yes. And then it says, on account of matters to include landscape and heritage constraints, the site is not identified as appropriate for allocation for development. I see a little contradiction.
Yeah, I think there is a contradiction. It's clearly a sensitive site in landscape terms, but I think that could be replicated for a number of sites. I think it's a contradiction that needs clarifying and amending in redrafting, but it is a recommendation for allocation.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think the lady from Lympstone Parish Council pointed out that this was in the previous iteration of the plan a second choice site. So that was the reason, I think, given as to why we weren't recommending it for allocation at that time. Further assessment work suggests that, as you know, we're struggling to find suitable sites. We think the landscape and heritage constraints can be mitigated through design and layout within the site to minimise their impact, although we accept that there are issues in terms of those factors. And acknowledge the points that have been raised about the previous public inquiry into this, albeit that was 12 years ago. The fact remains that we are struggling to find suitable sites to meet a housing need, which is dictated to us by government, and we have to meet those numbers. At the time, 12 years ago, this site wasn't necessary for it to come forward to meet our housing need at that point in time. We had better sites fundamentally. Now we don't. Those better sites have been developed, they've been built out, and now we're having to revisit this site and reassess it in light of the current circumstances, the current housing requirements. And as a result, our assessment is that while we acknowledge there are significant landscape and heritage constraints, we feel the site needs to come forward to meet the housing need, and we need to mitigate those issues as much and as best as we can through the design and layout of the site.
Councillor Parr.
Well, I must say I found this report totally confusing because, firstly, in the landscape section, it did say it was located within the existing green wedge in the current East Devon local plan. Then moving on, where you get to the in bold section, within green wedge in adopted local plan or made neighbourhood plan, no answer. Then, should the site be allocated? Yes. And as has been pointed out by previous speakers, then a reason why not allocating. So this completely undermines my faith in the reports, and I hope other reports are not inaccurate in this way. Finally, I do not see the point of us having green wedges if we are going to allow large areas of them to be developed. And I think this is completely unacceptable and totally confusing to people who think a green wedge is there to be protected. And we have said we will protect them. And I cannot possibly vote for this site.
I'm going to come to the defence of officers slightly on the subject of the report. You've got 350 pages in front of you today, another 300-400 were published yesterday, and another 700-800, possibly more, are in the works to come out next week, I think, for the meetings on the 20th and the 23rd. There is an awful lot of work going on and things do get missed. We have collectively tried very hard to make sure it's all picked up, and I'm sorry that there are problems with this particular chapter of this report. It's inevitable with the volume that's being processed that something will go awry. It's unfortunate that it's gone awry twice in the same paper and on a significant report, I'll give you that, but just some words in defence of the team there then. I have Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question first of an officer? On the page 71 under infrastructure, it says Healer Work advises the site is dependent on a new junction on Exeter Road. Just seek clarity that that is the case, because previous speakers have mentioned access to it from Cortlands Lane, and it would seem that wouldn't be necessary for the traffic if there was access from Exeter Road. So could someone answer that? Just clarify that if this were to proceed, then the planning requirement would be that the junction would be onto Exeter Road.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, so that is the advice from Devon County as the Highway Authority, is that access would need to be off Exeter Road. Some members may be aware there's the Deanham Way extension that comes across there and comes out to Roundabout Junction on Exeter Road at approximately that point. So I think they're working on the basis that they would need to have an access off that, an arm off that roundabout basically into the site. So access wouldn't be dependent on Cortlands Lane.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously this is the first of many that we've got to consider, and points have been made about green wedges, about coalescence, and essentially it's going to fall to this committee to make these decisions, and they won't be popular. Some may be popular, most will be unpopular. But as Councillor Howe alluded to right at the beginning, if East Devon fails to provide these sites, it will be open season for development. So all of the objections, all of the concerns that members have will be moot, because people will just build. So we have to be pragmatic. Again, I don't, mindful of Mr Hunter's advice, I don't want to predetermine any discussion on the next one, which I see is recommended for refusal. But This is close to existing development. If you look at the map on page 70, there is a significant amount of housing already here, so which isn't present on the map for the next site adjacent. And I hear everything that's been said, but this is going to be a constant theme throughout our discussions today for sites in the middle of the district and then sites in the east of the district. And I don't live in Exmouth, so I have to take this from a purely sort of looking at an objective view, and for members who are present and for members of the parish councils who have sat through public inquiries, who have listened to debate over decades about these sites, it comes back to a point. If East Devon, according with National Planning Policy Framework, doesn't build here, then we have to build somewhere else. If they're not a new town, then each other town in East Devon will have to accommodate growth. A lot of our coastal towns can't, because essentially if you draw a semicircle around them, 50% of it's in the sea, and we're not at a point yet, deferring to my colleague, at the point of reclaiming the sea to develop for housing. So I will listen to the rest of the debate with an open mind and see what other members have to say, members who have far more knowledge of this area than I. But some of these sites, we are going to have to make a decision based on pure pragmatism and mindful of, if we don't, what else is going to happen in the future that will be outside of our control to strategically plan. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. This is not a straight yes or no one. It seems to be very, very finely balanced. There is coalescence to consider, there's the Green Wedge to consider, and the coastal protection area to consider. I would like to propose that this we move on to this, and we might have to come back to it, or we might not. But I would like to suggest that we move on this one.
Was that a seconding, Councillor Parr? Okay, we have a proposal to move on then from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Parr. I still have Councillor Davey to speak.
Well, I'm simply going to echo what Councillor Hayward has said. If you don't put 100 houses here, where are you going to put them? And as Councillor Hayward has pointed out, if we don't allocate sufficient housing, it becomes open season for developers. We don't have a local plan. They can just build pretty much anywhere they like, and we do not have many defences. So it's with a heavy heart, because I do know this area well. I walked through it last week. I have to say most of the pine trees have died that were put in. But I think you could have a sympathetic development here. Yes, it does erode the gap between Lympstone and Exmouth, but it doesn't remove it. And if you're looking for places to develop, it is one of the better ones. It's right on a bus route. You could have a cycle access down Courtlands Lane onto the Ex-Estuary cycle path, which would take you both ways towards Exeter or down to Exmouth. And there is a walking route, the East Devon Way, which does, I appreciate, yes, it's not always particularly level and not muddy, but it's possible with the right footwear to walk across the fields and down into Lympstone. In fact, I did it last week and visited the Red Wing pub. So with that plug, I'll leave it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Levine, I've already heard you, so unless there's anything very, very quick. Okay, thank you. Are there any other speakers before we move to a vote? Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Chair. I feel like Councillor Young, I feel, where can we go on this? Because it's not that long ago that Plum Park in Exmouth was built, and it was built purely because we didn't have a 4.5-year land supply. And it's a hideous development. It's built outside the building line. So the consequences of turning this down is we're going to end up possibly on the same site in a few years' time, because we haven't got a 4.5-year land supply, with something going here which is going to be beyond our control. And that's the place we are at the moment. And we know that, and I'm not too sure if the members of the public do. I'm very sympathetic with the members of the public, but I'm also sympathetic with Ben's view, and I'm also sympathetic with Jeff Young's. So we are, as the Americans would say, we're in a rock and a hard place. Whatever we do is wrong. And it's difficult, so I think I can't support it, but I see the consequences of not supporting it, which is pulling up my conscience. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
I think you've just summed it up pretty well there for us, Councillor Bailey. Any other speakers before we go to a vote? We will be. Okay, Councillor Howe.
I think most things have been said, but I do think we need to point out to the members of the public, particularly the speakers, some of the reasoning we've got to challenge and work out. And I think, in particular, the appeal, where appeals have been made, they've been on the current existing local plan. We are redrawing a local plan, which means a total change in emphasis for any appeal inspector. So although we need to take hints from an appeal, an old appeal, we are redrawing those policies now, so it's not relevant for the future or determination here. So it's not quite as easy as we would hope, but nevertheless, I think the whole committee fully understands the comments made.
Okay, with that said then, we have a proposal to move on and not to allocate the site for the time being. Those in favour of moving on? Sorry, Councillor Hayward?
Just from your wording, that was...
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. The proposal is to move on. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3. Nice and high, please. 7. Those against? And those abstaining? Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify as well? Councillor Ingham, you took part in that vote? That's right, to move on.
Oh. Okay, we move on then to site reference Lympstone 12. And we now have 100 more houses to find. Yeah.
Lympstone 12 is land through which the Deanham Way extension will pass when built, assuming will be built. A sensitive site in heritage terms, in particular, given buildings, gardens to the south of the site and an open aspect to the site. Recommendation is not to allocate.
Okay, public speakers then. I have Councillor Young first.
I'm going to be worn out by the end of the day. Yeah, with this one, because it's the Deanham Way is coming straight through it, it's obvious that we can't support it. So I would recommend that we move on. Thank you.
Councillor Ingham? I would say that if all you're going to do is agree with the officer recommendation, feel free to stay seated, just to save time.
Chair, I am minded for us to move on, but I have to say, then we're going to revisit potentially this and other sites that we may change our opinion on at a later time, today or at another meeting.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Members, this is advice obviously to the two people who've just spoken, then the ward members, but to you in general. You're more than entitled to speak in favour or against allocating a particular site to the local plan, because you feel that that's the appropriate thing to do for your ward, and that's fine. You can speak in relation to the sites, but if it is apparent, which it was clearly, I thought, with regards to Councillor Ingham in the first application that we just dealt with then, that a decision had already been made in his mind to predetermine whether or not to include the site, my advice is to you, speak, but don't take part in that particular vote, because you could have a complaint raised against you if you choose to ignore that advice in your vote anyway. So it's entirely up to you at the end of the day. If you're not bothered about having a standards complaint putting in against you and you'll deal with it at that stage, that's fine. But my advice to you is, if you do speak in relation to any of these applications and you do come to a determination beforehand in your own mind, sit out the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. Okay, I have no other speakers registered for Lympstone 12 committee. Councillor Parr.
Move on.
Sorry, is that a proposal to move on? Okay. Seconder, Councillor Davey. Any other speakers? Okay, those in favour? That's unanimous. There we go, that was nice and quick. Should we do them all like that? Lympstone 08. I have Ms. Culhane. Am I saying that right? Sorry.
Hello again. This site is within the current green wedge. Now, according to policy, development should not be permitted if it would conflict with the purposes of the green wedge. And as a lay person, this is all I can rely upon. The site is earmarked for housing, 14 dwellings, which would conflict with the policy aims of maintaining the open character of a green lung, contributing to health and well-being for residents, providing valuable wildlife corridors and habitat, and protecting areas of landscape importance and visual amenity. There are views from the north of the site where the site is more open and is not seen against the backdrop of the built-up urban edges of the town. In this respect, despite the proximity of some Exmouth-related urban development, the site has a countryside feel. This site in particular is visible from the north side, i.e. Wootton Lane in Lympstone. Residents here have recorded a variety of mobile wildlife species on a flight route from the top end of Wootton Lane, approximately 250 metres away. In addition, many other wildlife have been recorded in the fields between Wootton Lane and Summer Lane. This site drains into the Wootton Brook catchment along small tributaries with a very low base for flows, making them very vulnerable to pollution. Surface water runoff is known to be high in this area, and this increases the risk of pollution. And for reference, I'm directed to the Upper Wootton Brook Catchment Study Phase 2 report and the Lympstone Flood Risk Model. In conclusion, this site should not be allocated, but if it is, again, we'd need a robust surface water treatment system and a temporary surface water treatment system before construction work commences. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, members, just quickly, I went slightly too fast on the last one, and Mr. Hunter didn't catch who seconded it. Was it you, Councillor Young? Oh, no, it was Councillor Davey. Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that one. I'll go slightly slower in future.
I'm not that quick at that.
Councillor Young, I have you to speak next.
I will hold fire on this one, taking the advice of the solicitor.
Councillor Ingham?
Like I said on the previous one, we're minded to move on, which I believe is the correct thing, and we'll have to possibly revisit the ones we move on from in the future. But I do note that the proximity of this one within the coastal protection area, which should be noted.
Okay, that's the end of the public speakers list then. Councillor Hayward coming into committee.
Thank you, Chair. Mindful of the eloquence of the last public speaker and our previous decisions, especially the one that just went before, a very modest development here, very close, simply across the road within shouting distance of Hullam Road to Thomas Close development. Sensitively done, I think would be quite a nice development. And for those residents who ultimately would live here, essentially they've just got the benefit of the deferral of the site to the west. So on that, bearing in mind the comments within the report, I'm happy to propose that this is included in accordance with off the recommendations, site 08 Landolph Summer Lane.
Okay, before I come to Councillor Young, do we have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Howe.
Yeah, we are, if we're not very careful, storing up real problems for us at a later time. So as such, I'm happy to second this. I do think, using a phraseology of a supermarket, every one counts, shall we say, and 14 very low numbers. Again, what the objectors have said should be dealt with as a full application, not at this stage, unfortunately. So as such, I'm struggling, shall we say, not to.
Okay, we have a proposal and second for allocating then. Councillor Young.
I'm afraid I don't agree with the proposal, mainly because there is a suggestion coming from County Council that Summer Lane would be made into a cycle route because of Deanham Way. And by having this development off Summer Lane, that will be detrimental to, obviously, a cycle lane. Also, it's in the coastal protection area. I think we should be protecting that. And it's going to be a very busy junction. You can see that Deanham Way is just there, and the new, the top of that site will be right next to Deanham Way. So unless we can have a junction off Deanham Way into it, which I don't think County Council would approve, it would be detrimental to the proposed cycleway that is coming forward at the moment.
Mr. Hunt, did you want to come in now?
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Chad. I just wanted to clarify something because I think it might hopefully assist members. And it's no criticism as such. I was away on holiday last week, so this is the first that I've seen of the setup and how we're doing things. But the way that this works is that if you speak as a ward member and you go up and speak, from the lectern, and you've got some pre-prepared notes and you're reading that and you've made that decision in your own mind, that is predetermination. Having said that, you are, if you're a member of this committee, perfectly entitled to speak and say whatever you feel about the application site being allocated when it comes to the debate. So it may well be in your interest not to bother standing up and saying your piece at that stage. You might want to wait and then discuss it in debate when you can say whatever you feel about it, having heard all of the public speakers who want to speak beforehand. The problem that we've got is that if you speak before a public speaker and you've not heard what they've had to say and take that into account, you're not coming to things with an open mind. So if that assists you in any way, I hope it does. Thank you.
Chair, on that very point, when I was speaking on Lympstone 07, the notes I took were while the public was speaking. I took those notes, Jeff saw me do it. That wasn't, I didn't predetermine before I came. I listened to what they said, and I said one or two things that I thought they'd missed out. I don't think that's predetermined. That's why I voted. Thank you.
And that's fair comment to be honest with you, but from what I was hearing, it sounded to me that it was. If your argument is that it wasn't because you've taken that into account, you've now clarified that, then that's fine. But as I say, to avoid this confusion going forward, members, if you're a ward member and you're on the committee, don't bother getting up. Just say what you want to say when it comes to debate. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. I think the advice has been heard. It's for members to decide what you want to do with that advice. We have a proposal from Councillor Hayward and seconded by Councillor Howe for Lympstone 08 to go forward as a recommendation in the plan. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I can't support that at the moment. As Jeff said, Summer Lane is scheduled to be turned into a cycle and pedestrian route. If the Dinan Way extension goes ahead, I'd rather see this one come forward after the Dinan Way extension has actually come to fruition. And at that point, we'd be able to look at the issue of access, but access onto Summer Lane would be a no-no in my book. It's only 14 homes, so I'm going to support moving on if we get to that point.
Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make the point that there are already properties accessed off Summer Lane, that wouldn't prevent what is being proposed in terms of the cycle lane. It would just be for access only for those properties and not a through route, as I understand it. So I don't think it's necessarily precluding what's being proposed in terms of the cycle lane if it were allocated, just to make that point.
Can I just come back on that? No, the fact is, if you've got 14 houses using one entrance, I appreciate the other buildings there and the other homes, the church, they will need that access. So I would presume the proposal would be to cut it off halfway along so that it can no longer be used as a cut through, which it is regularly at the moment. So it'd be access only, but it's adding another 14 potential residents to what would, well, it would probably double the number of residents trying to use that end of Summer Lane for access.
Okay, with all that said then, Councillor Ingham?
Chair, I disagree. In the interest of being open-minded on this particular one, I think you have to, we should move on and then not cross this off the list any more than any other one or include it in a list. We're in a tricky position, you're saying, because it seems that officers and members are in disagreement on a number of sites. And yes, I understand that this one would have to have some sort of bollards arrangement to make sure that it was pedestrian and cyclist friendly within in some context, but that depends where you do that as to whether this site would be acceptable or not. I would understand that because this is in a coastal protection area, my instinct for any site would be to not allow it to go forward. But in the juggling process, which we seem to be engaged in now, then there's a hierarchy of sites which can be developed, and I don't necessarily agree with some of the opinions of other councillors here on what they've done so far. I remain open-minded on this one, and I think we should move on to.
The proposal then from Councillor Hayward is to allocate this site in the Regulation 19 plan. All those in favour of that proposal? That's 4 in favour. Those against? Seven against. Any abstentions? No. Okay, the proposal fails. Do we have a counter proposal? Councillor Parr.
I propose we move on.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Davey, I saw first. Those in support? Everyone except me and Mike, however many that is. And those against? Okay, in which case then we move on. We're cooking up quite a list of sites to come back to. Limpstone 13 then, and I have first up Councillor Young.
Again, I'll wait until the debate. Thank you.
Councillor Ingham. Okay, into committee then. Councillor Parr.
Just, Chairman, what's happening about Limpston 12? Sorry, I'm confused. Well, I don't know where we are in our...
I mean, it's Limpston 13 next on my list.
It is, but it's not in the order we should be running it.
That's because we're running to speak list rather than
Yeah. Running through a
Okay.
different list.
Was this the one that was in the report as being in Littleham when it's? Possibly. Okay, what do others have next? Is it Exmouth 4? Yeah. Okay, as that takes us on to a new area then in Exmouth Brixington, is anybody opposed, as we've been going for nearly an hour and 3/4, to a short 5-minute break? No, okay, we'll break then until 10 to 12. Okay, welcome back, members. I'm going to exercise my prerogative at chair, just to speak very briefly. Do bear in mind that everything we choose to say move on to at this point, if we don't make the numbers, we have to come back to, and if we don't make 946 a year, plus, within a month of the government publishing the new NPPF, so realistically by perhaps mid-November, then we have to find another 200 a year on top of that within the next 18 months. Otherwise, government's going to come in, step in, make a local plan for us, and in the meantime, we'll have to deal, or planning committee, more accurately, we'll have to deal with the presumption in favour of sustainable development. I just wanted to make that reminder, because to me, that's quite a stark prospect and one that we really want to avoid. With that being said then, I'll stand corrected on Limpston 13, and the next site then is Exmouth 04, which is a cross-boundary site in both Exmouth, Brixington and Woodbury and Limpston wards. For public speaking then, I have Mr. Andrew Roberts.
Good morning. On behalf of the North East Exmouth Residents Group, we yet again ask the committee to reject the officer's delusional plan to develop greenfield sites in North East Exmouth and Limpstone. There is no so-called master plan linking these disparately owned sites. It's only in the minds of the planning department. The sites are completely unsustainable. Only EDDC would measure distances from the site to facility as the crow flies, ignoring actual distances and dangerously fast roads. Surface water flooding is a significant issue in all of these sites and would have a profound and negative impact on both Wootton Brook and Littleham Brook. There is deeply felt concern over the threat of coalescence between Exmouth and Limpstone that would be brought about by the development of Limpstone 09 and 10. I'm sorry, but I would prefer to cover Exmouth 04, Limpstone 9 and 10 all in one go. That will probably save the committee another 6 minutes. So if you will bear with me, I shall cover 3 sites rather than just the one. Exmo 04, the brief is extremely badly written with confusing mapping references and irrelevant comments on the 400-metre exclusion zone from the SSSI. Where are officers actually allocating the 50 dwellings? Are they recommending dwellings on Exmo 04, 4A, 4B, or 45? There seemed to be some great confusion in the papers that have been presented. This site is part of the historic Marley estate, and the lawns contain numerous veteran locomotives that would be damaged by the development and their proximity to the required attenuation ponds. The previous plans that were put forward some time ago included a huge attenuation pond right in the middle of the trees. Dangerous road access onto Higher Hullam Road is overlooked in the assessment, and no mention that the site was rejected for planning in 2014. So just move on quickly to Limpstone 09, which is on the other side of Hullam Road, but there are dangerous access issues off Hullam Road. It has high volumes of traffic. Assessment doesn't recognise the site as adjacent to historic woodlands. The hedgerows along Exview Road and Hullam Road contain lots of veteran trees that would need protecting. Removing TPO protections must not be allowed. It's in the coastal protection area, so the site should not be built on. Limpstone 10 is beyond belief. How did this get through the initial sifting? The site wasn't recommended by HELA. There's no pedestrian access down the Hullam Road. I've offered the officers to come and walk down Hullam Road, but I've not really had any people take it up. It's a dangerous road to walk down. It's completely unsustainable. It doesn't comply to the 1600-metre rule at all. It's in the coastal protection area, again, so it shouldn't really be built on. The site assessments are broadly unchanged since the initial assessments were made 2 years ago and indicate that EDDC have taken no notice of residents' views and information supplied. Local EDDC councillors from Lympstone and Brixington have also been ignored. Views of Lympstone Council and Exmouth Council are equally ignored, as have any comments from the public consultation. We urge the committee to note these points, do the right thing and exclude the North East, Exmouth and Lympstone sites from the emerging plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I have then Councillor Young. Would you like to speak now or in committee?
I'll speak in committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ingham? Okay, in which case then Councillor Chapman, if you'd like to step up to the public speaking mic.
Morning, everyone. Land at Marley Drive. I understand this is put forward as a part site. Wildlife and natural habitat site, trees, bats, insects, wildflowers. A number of reports were sent to EDDC from a number of organisations saying that this site should not be built on. It is also close to the Pebblebed Heath. It has underground springs and the land is very wet and boggy. There are 2 ponds with wildlife. I would urge the committee to listen to Natural England. I, for one, wouldn't argue with them and the other agencies, so please reject this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Short and sweet, the way we like it. Okay, I have no other public speakers registered then, so we come into committee. Nobody wants to speak on this side. Councillor Young.
I better kick off. There's a lot of woodland in there, ancient woodland. It's on the spring line, as we've already heard. Access onto Holland Road would be really detrimental for loads of reasons, but because it's in the coastal protection area, it's 400 metres 400 metres from the Pebblebed Heath, the top end. Because of the road network there, I don't feel I can support it, and the speakers have said very vocally the reasons why. I would suggest that we move on this side. Thank you.
Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. This site, I believe, is not in the coastal protection area. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. But I take on board certainly what Councillor Young says about the Pebblebed Heaths, and without any doubt at all, I can assure you the northeastern end of that site is full of springs because of the nature of the geology in that area. So I would support second moving on for this one at this time.
I don't think we'd had a proposal at that point. So, oh, you meant to propose? Okay.
I meant to propose.
All right. Shall we allow that, Damien? Okay. So proposed that we move on by Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Ingham. Then, it is worth noting for members' benefit that the northeast side of the site, just past that pinch point by the garden centre, by the houses next to the garden centre, that's not proposed for allocation. If you look at the main maps in the Exmouth technical report, you'll see it's the sort of southwestern kind of half of the site that officers are recommending go forward. Just thought I'd clarify that one. Any other speakers on this site? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Taking in mind what the gentleman said earlier, taking these 3 sites together, none of them are sustainable. There is no footpath. Allen Road is a very dangerous road, and when it rains, there's floods, there's pebbles literally rolling down from the pebble bed heaths, and it's very, very dangerous. It's also, what can I say? You've got to walk, if you're brave enough or silly enough, to walk to the nearest shop or school. You're looking at probably 20 minutes to 3/4 an hour, depending on how fit you are. This area, if it's supposed to be in Exmouth, is actually a £12 taxi ride to the centre of Exmouth, which is a significant amount to pay, but I'm sure it's all done properly, and I've checked with my former colleagues in the taxi company, this is how much it's going to cost you. So that's not sustainable at all. And I think if we were given other circumstances, we would even look at this twice. Thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bailey raises a very valid point. You know, we're not planning in the centre of Slough. In the centre of Slough, everywhere is sustainable. Everywhere is accessible by a pavement or a road. We live in East Devon. This committee has tried for the past 4 years to argue to national government, previous government, this government, that we have some uniqueness, that our landscape, our layout doesn't allow for this level of housing. It's fallen on deaf ears. We've received legal advice from our officers that we do not have any argument to put forward that will just be thrown back in our face. You know, I love living in East Devon. I came from Slough. Pretty much nowhere in East Devon is sustainable. Wherever we build on a green field, there are unlikely to be pavements. We have single track roads. This is the reality of what we have to deal with. So if we look at each site and say there's no pavement, there's no drainage, these things can be provided within the planning process. But if we view it on the basis that it's not already there, we are going to find ourselves in a huge problem. And I come back to the point that the Chair raised earlier, Councillor Howes referred. We have got to find sites. And it's all very well for this committee. We could park all of these, and then the next meeting is going to be, whereabouts in Honiton and Ottery do you want to put them? And the people of Honiton and Ottery will say, it's not sustainable, it's not permissible. There's a green field, there's a view, there's a coastal protection area, there's woodland. Most of East Devon is covered in woodland. Some of it is going to have to come down unless there is a change in the NPPF, which is unlikely to happen. And I'm very grateful for the Chair for clarifying earlier that if we don't do this, the numbers will go up. They won't go down, they'll go up. So on this one, I entirely agree. Looking at the map, there is a beautiful area. I have never walked around here, so I can't speak with any confidence about it. I'm looking at it from a map view. But I just beseech members to look at this holistically across the whole district. You know, in 3 weeks' time, 2 weeks' time, my own area is going to be considered. And the good people of Axminster, of Seaton, of Honiton, of the eastern periphery of the district are going to have the same arguments. Why should you concrete over us when the whole of Exmouth is free to be concreted? Why shouldn't they take their fair share? So that's just my point I wish to make, Chair. Everywhere in East Devon pretty much is unsustainable. It has woodland, it has green fields. We cannot discount sites just for that reason. As much as it might pain me to say it, I loathe digging up trees for no reason. But unfortunately, our hands on this are somewhat tied. Thank you.
You've saved me the trouble, Councillor Hayward, so thank you very much for that. I think Mr. Freeman just has some context that he wanted to add to this debate.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know if someone can put HDMI 2 on. There we go. So I just wanted to draw members' attention to this plan, which is in page 40 in the agenda, which shows the relationship with the Goodmoors Farm development, which some members may be aware of, is currently being built out at the moment, and abuts this Exmo 04A, the part that's proposed to be allocated in the southwest corner that's green on the plan there. So it actually abuts the Goodmoors Farm development to its southwestern corner. The Goodmoors Farm development, I can't remember exactly how many houses, I'm sure it says in the report, but it does include land for primary school and some shops, community facilities. So it's not as remote, this is my point, it's not as remote as it looks on the plan that was on the screen. So I just want to make members aware of that. And obviously we're also looking at this in relation to other sites that we'll come on to in that area that together make that more of a logical urban extension of Exmouth than it perhaps appears in isolation. Thank you, Chair.
You have already spoken, Councillor Ingham. Very quickly.
On the slide you had for number 4, it said, as marked in there, that Exmouth 04B was recommended for, moving on. So if that were the case, then surely if 4A did move forward, there wouldn't be access onto Holland Road, because you wouldn't drive a road through just the open countryside to facilitate that, would you? Can I ask for clarification on that? What would be the feeling of that?
So clarification on where the access is coming from.
Yes, but would it be Marley Road, or is it Goodmoors, or both, or what is it?
I'll look to officers. Do we have any indication?
If O4A were developed in isolation and you didn't have a strategic scheme there, the likely point of access would be from that nib of land on the south-east side coming down. And it's Marley Road, I can't read it. Yeah, so that would be. If a bigger allocation were made that included, for example, LIMP 14 as shown on that plan, there would potentially be scope to access from the north as well. But I think that would be a matter of detail.
I believe the potential to develop LIMP 14 was to go through Goodmoors Farm, so that's why I asked it, not to go on to Holland Road. That's what I heard. So.
I think it's worth highlighting that while the state of the roads is a relevant consideration, the actual detail for access would be at planning stage rather than here today. I appreciate it's a bit of a grey area in terms of do we consider the sites to be acceptable, but that's worth bearing in mind. Do we have any other speakers for this point? Councillor Davey and then Councillor Levine.
Yeah, I'm just going to say very quickly, I can't support development in this area. I mean, in contrast to Limpston 07, which we agreed to move on from, this has no sustainable access. There is a cycle route down Marley Road, but apart from that, higher Marley Road, anybody will tell you, they had to reroute the East Devon Way because it was so dangerous. Holland Road, as Councillor Bailey has pointed out, it does, it has a spring that runs out regularly into it every time it rains. It's a fast road. Councillor Hayward made the point, well, pavements can be provided. Not in Holland Road, because it kind of has steep banks on either side. And there's nowhere even there's a pedestrian to jump to if a car comes. If there's a wide verge, you can kind of get into that. But there's nowhere. So I'm very uncomfortable about any development along this road.
Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to support Councillor Hayward because I've been listening to all the contributions from the public and councillors. They're generic. They can be applied to every site in East Devon. What I'm looking for is something special about the site, something that tells me it is different, we've got to do something, we can't build it or we can build it. And at the moment, I haven't heard anything. So, unfortunately, because our hands are tied and we've got to find 20,000 odd houses for this district, I have to support the development of this site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Levine. We do have a proposal to move on. Does anybody have anything new to add? I'm sorry, I'm not coming back out to public speaking. We're in committee now, thank you. Okay, in which case then we have a proposal to move on from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Ingham. Okay, in which case those in favour of us moving on. Hands nice and high, please. 7 in favour of that. Those against? 3. Those abstaining? 1. I'm sensing a recurring theme is starting to emerge in our votes here. Limpstone 09 is next up then. If we go back to HDMI 1, please, on the projector. Okay, thank you. And I have Mr. Roberts, you've already spoken. Have you got anything to add? You've won that fight, so we'll move on then to Ms. Diamond.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Limpstone Flood Resilience Group, which has been working with the Environment Agency and Devon County Council to mitigate the flood risk in Limpstone. Sites 9, 10A and 01 all drain into the Wootton Brook. The Wootton Brook catchment is a rapid response catchment as defined by Devon County Council and the Environment Agency. This means that it has a flashy runoff, which in turn can flood the village. The situation is made worse by the fact that the brook is tide locked for a period of up to 2 hours. This means that the water backs up the brook until the tide goes out. The underlying soil on these sites is a clayey loam, which has naturally low water permeability. Climate change is likely to result in heavier, more intense localised storms, leading to more rapid runoff. With inappropriate development, there is a likelihood of increased flood risk to the village and the possibility of flooding on the scale experienced in such places as Boscastle or Newton Poppleford last summer. There is already concern about the possibility of increased flooding resulting from the Dean Way extension, particularly as this has not been designed to take account of the latest advice on the effects of climate change. There is no evidence of a water quality risk assessment, which is essential to both sites, as the Wootton Brook catchment is a small, sensitive catchment which discharges in the ex-estuary. Both the brook and the estuary are highly vulnerable to pollution and have high amenity value. Therefore, a concern that this is a very unsuitable site for development and is likely to cause serious flooding in the village in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Diamond. Councillor Francis from Limpstone Parish Council.
Limpstone Parish Council object to this site being recommended for development in another proposal that, despite being located within our parish, it counts towards the Exmouth development targets. Limpstone 9 and 10 are in the coastal protection area, and both of them have significant and distinct similar disadvantage, which means they should not be developed. Our reasons for our strong opposition are as follows. This site has serious flooding concerns and sensitivity. Limpstone Flood Resilience Group regard this site as very unsuitable for development. The Flood Resilience Group are a respected and knowledgeable body, and we take their concerns very seriously. We hope you will too. The documentation in the agenda reports pack acknowledges that for 9 to be a credible development, site, the land to the south needs to be developed first. Crazy. There are access considerations and the suitability of Hullen Road to cope with increased traffic any development would bring is also a factor to be considered. There are already existing concerns about flooding along Hullen Road during poor weather. There are no safe pedestrian routes to a bus stop or to Exmouth Village or Exmouth facilities. The site is distant from schools, shops and doctors, meaning the use of vehicles would be more likely. These sites cannot be regarded as sustainable because they do not have accessible services and they do not align growth with infrastructure. There's also considerable concerns and sensitivity for wildlife. Both sides of Hullen Road, from Common to Exview Road, are covered by TPOs and contain veteran trees, which would be adversely impacted by development. Proximity to Exview Woods, an unregistered but ancient woodland, will have serious environmental impacts. There is abundant wildlife and building on this green corridor will certainly very sadly impact the species there. In another meeting, there were salient points raised about the suitability, unsuitability and infrastructure of this area and how the new local plan should be building communities. It's hard to see how either Lympstone 9 or 10 could fit into a community. Consequently, on these grounds, it was felt that the sites were totally unsuitable in that meeting, but might present opportunities for other things such as Sangs areas. We hope you feel that way too and reject the recommendation to support.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. I've lost where I am on the page. Which site are we doing? Lympstone 09. Councillors Young and Ingham, would you like to speak now or in committee?
Later.
Okay. In which case then we come to committee. Members. Councillor Young.
Thank you. I know this site well. I cycle past it pretty well every week. In the workshops that we had, we discounted all the sites off Holland Road, and I supported it then, and I support the idea that we don't have any development off Holland Road at this from the top end. Yes, I do understand it would create a really good Sangs area. It would, or a nature reserve, possibly football pitches. But for development at that location, I don't support it. But while I was discussing what sites to oppose and what sites to support, there are a lot of sites that I will be supporting, but these sites off Holland Road are a no-no for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to agree, you know, all those sites that are in what's described in the papers as the Exmouth-Lympstone gap. I don't think it's appropriate for us to consider them. I do think there's some other ones which Exmouth councillors have identified during our workshop, and I agree with them. So it's a shame that we're not dealing with those first, so we can agree with the numbers and then come back to these, because we're going to be debating some of these twice, I feel, unnecessarily. This is one, it's in, you know, coastal protection area. Our community within Lympstone believe that anything northwest of Holland Road is inappropriate in our parish, and that goes northwest of Holland Road, northwest of Summer Lane, northwest of Cortlands Lane, as we saw. So that's why I don't think it's appropriate for me to tell Exmouth where they should be allocating, but they shouldn't. I don't think it's necessary to compromise the coastal protection area, let alone the green wedge. So I'll be interested to see what we condone in the next few sites. Thank you.
Yes, I shall be interested indeed as well. A slight correction there. Exmouth doesn't decide where its allocations go. Strategic Planning Committee does. It's
You
this
know what I
committee's
mean.
decision.
It's not my place to tell their community where they must go. I don't think that's correct, or for me to suggest that. They must take that decision, and once they've identified the right numbers, I'm sure we'll all agree with them.
I'll move on from that point then. Just to draw committees, and I'm sorry for labouring the point over and over again, but just to draw committees' attention back to the previous report that we considered at item 8, where officers have pointed out that the recommendations that they had put in front of us and would be putting in front of us over the course of September would get us to 20,812 dwellings, nearly 9% or about, what's that, 1,800 houses short of the recommended 10% buffer. We already don't have enough sites. We've lost, my vice chair informs me, 164 already this morning, and we're 2 hours and 22 minutes into the first of 4 of these meetings. That's all I'm going to say on that point then. Other speakers from committee. Councillor Parr.
Yes, this site is in coastal protection area, and I'm reading the technical report, and it says under other constraints there are no other significant constraints identified. So what are constraints? Why doesn't it say coastal protection area is a constraint?
That is why we had asked for the PowerPoint presentation to show those, so it was clear for members on that point. Councillor Howe, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I think I need to on this one in particular. And I get everything that's being said, but we have Goodmore's Farm directly opposite it. You can't consider it unsustainable when you've got Goodmore's Farm with a school, some local facilities and everything else directly across the road. Now, with regard to flooding and the water, I get that. I fully understand that. But that is a issue for full planning application, not to be considered at this stage. Again, we can't skirt around this. You know, I'm really struggling. I really am struggling to understand. We're going to be back here. We will be back here. But who knows?
Could I have an answer, please? Where would, in our reports, perhaps in the future, under other constraints, shouldn't it say things like coastal protection area? What are constraints? That's what I want to know. If it's not a constraint, then, you know, what is this coastal protection area? Why have we got it?
Yeah, I mean, I would point out it may not necessarily explicitly be there, but it's on the presentation, and everyone so far has seemed very able of identifying whether it is a coastal protection area or not. I think we can take that point away for future reports in terms of making it clear in writing for absolute clarity whether these are in the Green Wedge, the coastal protection areas, or the national landscapes. Are there any other speakers on the actual site? Okay, well, in that case then, I don't think we have a proposal, so I'm going to propose from the chair that this site goes forward as an allocation. And as I've proposed it from the chair, I don't need a seconder, so we'll go to a vote then. Those in favour? Three. Those against? Is it 7? 1, 2, 3. Oh no, it's 6 because Councillor Fernley has left. Those abstaining? No. Okay. The proposal fails. Do we have a counter proposal? Councillor Young, I saw your hand first. Move on. Is that second from Councillor Ingham? Those in favour? 6. Those against? 3. Are you abstaining, Councillor Howe?
I'll abstain.
Yep. Okay. There we go. We move on then to Lympstone 10. Worth mentioning that this is another of these split sites where officers are proposing that the southern half of the site, which is 10A, is allocated, but the northern half is not. Mr. Roberts, do you have anything to add on this site specifically? Yes, I will. Okay, you have 3 minutes.
I won't take 3 minutes. I did sort of cover it in my initial one, and I'll only make the point and maybe ask a question of Ed. How do you get from Lympstone 10A down Holham Road if you're either walking? There is no access past Sowden Break. I don't know whether you could bring back up the slide showing the overview, which would be better. But there is no pedestrian access past Sowden Break. So even if you come out of the corner by Sowden Break, you've got to chance your arm, and I can show you a picture of an overturned car in Holham Road, just at that spot. So we're waiting for the accident. Any chance of a slide? Your nice overview. Oop, there we go. As you'll see, there's a gap between Lympstone 10A and Lympstone 9 on the northern side. That's owned by somebody else other than the landowner of the two sites there. There is no access past that without walking in the road. If you've walked in, as I said, I don't think any of the officers have actually been down Hallam Road since I've made that suggestion, because it's just impossible to do. So I would just reiterate that point. So thank you very much.
Mr. Dickens, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just responding on that point. So if a larger scale allocation was to come forward in this location, on the pedestrian safe routes, there would clearly be the option of building within the site boundaries, so within the boundary of the tree line. So there might be some tree loss to secure access, but there would be a potential pedestrian access along parallel with the road on the inside of the tree line. In respect to 10A and 08 access, certainly there would be an issue to look at, well, would there be scope for some sort of pedestrian access as a potential development? But there's also the whole issue of coming southwards from 10A, crossing the road through traffic calming on that road as part of a development scheme, looking at safe access routes across as part of a development scheme to secure access to land to the south, so providing safe pedestrian via that way. But these would be issues that would come forward through the comprehensive development of the site, should they be allocated, and that's the reason, part of the reason for a recommendation for a comprehensive scheme on those land areas.
Council's had 2 years to think about the access issue, and that's very plainly waffle. I mean, you can't go from 10A down Holland Road. You can't cross the road. You can't cross the road. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Diamond. Okay, thank you. Which brings us then to Councillor Francis again.
The only thing I wish to add to the objections that I highlighted for 9, for 10, that the agenda reports pack cites Limpstone 10 as being especially remote at its northern end. If it is remote by your own officer's assessment, it must be illogical to want to put houses there. Please consider our concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Councillors Young and Ingham in committee again? Okay, in which case that brings us to committee, and I have Councillor Hayward first.
Thank you, Chair. So another site, I think I've driven down Hallam Road once. It's no different to a lot of East Devon roads. Looking at the map here, you know, I would probably concur that the garden centre there is responsible for thousands of car journeys. Someone approved it. Someone approved that site, and I wish them every success. I love going to a garden centre. But to say that it's unsustainable because there's no pavements, the officer has quite rightly said, you can build pavements within sites. Devon County Council at the planning stage, this is the point where I need to reinforce, this is plan allocation, not planning considerations, not conditions, not fulls, not variants, not outlines. This is it possible to allocate the site? The planning committee would deal with the minutiae of making sure that people are safe, that there's access, the roads are secure, that pedestrians can move backwards and forwards. We are yet again conflating issues, and if it's a case that this road is unsafe and we shouldn't be allowed to build anything because there's too many cars, then arguably we shouldn't have built a garden centre there, because that throws thousands of car journeys at all times of day and night onto that road. That's just an observation, and I take on board everything that's said from members of the public. And for me, flooding issues are more pertinent because flooding is a risk to life. You know, I look at this, the point was made about coastal protection. I would say, how many people would look at this site on a map and say it's coastal? Yes, it's near the coast. Most of East Devon, half of East Devon is near the coast. So the nature of coastal protection for me is where cliffs are falling into the sea. That's coastal protection. But perhaps that's just for a landlubber's view of this, because I live in an inland town. Yeah, sorry, that's just my observation on this. I think this could be built on. I certainly agree that 10B should be discounted, but 10A, it's road accessible, looking here, directly opposite Marley Drive, all the people who live in Marley Drive probably have no objection to driving down there. You know, do they walk? You know, I think we can mitigate some of these things through careful planning conditions.
Sorry, can we have quiet from the gallery, please? Thank you. I have, did I hear that Councillor Ingham was going to go first this time, Jeff?
You did, Chair. For similar reasons to the previous, was it LIMP 9 we were looking at? Coastal Protection Area, maybe that's a clumsy name. It was coastal preservation, the idea being that if you were within, half a mile or whatever of the coast, or if you were in the middle of the estuary, could you see this site? Yes, you can. And that's what it is. But I have told you previously, similarly, that the site below to the west, it is in the coastal protection area, is visible from the estuary. It is north of Hullam Road. And why that's special to our community? Yes, officers, unfortunately, over the last 20 years have resisted from extending the Green Wedge and the coastal preservation area up to the Green Wedge with the coastal preservation area up to Woodbury Common. But the part of that ethos, whether we dislike it or whether we dislike it, Chair, is that our communities feel that you shouldn't be encouraging commuting to Exeter. If all of your settlements, extensions or site allocations are around this major settlement, and you put them all at the northeast or the north of Exmouth, you're encouraging commuting, which in this day and age, in a climate crisis, I would suggest to you is a bad strategy. And that's just one of the extra items we haven't debated yet today, but I know our communities, Woodbury and Lumsden, feel strongly about. So that's why, I agree with your idea that officers saying that 10B shouldn't be considered, because that's certainly going too far, a higher profile. But I would say move on this one. We shouldn't be allocating in this site. We can do better. And we haven't come to all of the sites which I suggested we debated first. Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Young.
Thank you. Again, another Exmouth land grab against Lympston. All the trees along there are TPO'd. The roads that you see opposite are cul-de-sacs. I know that. I've delivered leaflets there and lived cycling along Hullam Road. I would agree that we move on with this, so I would second it. Thank you.
Is that a proposal and a seconded? Okay, so proposed, Councillor Ingham, seconded, Councillor Young, that we move on. I have Councillor Davey next.
We're looking to site future development in sustainable locations. This is not a sustainable location. The 1,600 metres to the nearest services must be the parade of shops in Brixington, but there is no way you can walk or cycle without taking your life in your hands to get to those shops. Now, Mr. Dickens has said, yep, you could provide pedestrian access within the developments, yes, but you'd emerge out onto Hullam Road at some point, and there is just nowhere to provide pavements there. You'd have to remove hedges or something. So I'm afraid, to me at the moment, as things stand, this is not a sustainable location.
Are there any other speakers? No? Okay, in which case we have a proposal from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Young, for us to move on. Those in support of that? 8 in support. Those against? And those abstaining? Okay, thank you, members. Lympstone 14, then. I have Mr. Roberts. Anything to add?
I'm afraid so. It's the best of the worst within this grouping that have been put forward. Having said that, I am quite concerned about the additional flow of traffic through Goodmoors that would be generated. That, along with the traffic from the industrial estate that's going to be built at some point in the future, for which we're not quite actually sure when, but there are no shops, as far as I'm aware, to be added in there, will make it quite dangerous if you're going to that primary school. You're going to get heavy vehicles, you're going to get additional traffic from this site, and you're going to get the site traffic from Goodmoors itself, which won't be any lighter. So there's no additional recreational facilities being added in here. I'm sure the argument is there's loads in Goodmoors, but there aren't. There's a football pitch which has got 8 parking spaces but no actual facilities for changing or whatever, and it's got an area of, I think it's called landscape, which is basically about a quarter of an acre of shrubland for kids to play in if they're of that nature. There's lots of veteran trees and specimen trees. Talk about biodiversity gain. I'm not sure whether that will take into account the 2 fairly significant trees that the developers already taken down to make access into Goodmoors. Perhaps they'll like to make better on that. It's adjacent to the lawns, which is one we looked at in Exmo 04. That contains veteran trees, and it's also adjacent to an ancient tree. Quite specific, covered by NPPF as to what you should and shouldn't do with ancient trees. So I would say there's some significant issues within that area for tree preservation and making sure that the developer does the right thing. As I said, the residents will predominantly use cars. The site services in Brixington are limited. I think the Brixington councillors already would say it's overstretched before Goodmoors. Adding Goodmoors was quite a task. Adding another, in this case, 50 houses. Developer yesterday said maybe up to 80. So we need to be a bit wary of that. So, okay, I'm against it, but I do understand that this may be, out of the 4 that have been put up, is the least worst option. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Ms. Culhane, I have you on my list. Did you still want to speak on this one? No, I'm ready to first Parish Council. Okay, thank you. In which case, Councillor Francis.
The Parish Council has already been approached by the developer who wishes to discuss the possibilities of this site with us. While it is within our parish, Lympstone 14 is distanced from our village centre and we feel in the countryside. It is another proposal that, despite being located within the parish, counts towards Exmouth development targets. The site clearly has significant and distinct disadvantages. If developed, it would be isolated from our village as well as Exmouth services and amenities. There are concerns about flooding and connecting the area to sewage infrastructure, flooding issues associated with the site, access concerns with the suitability of Hullam Road, and pedestrian safety and nature concerns of that whole area are key issues. In another meeting, there were salient points raised about flooding, the infrastructure of the area, and how the new local plan should be building communities. And there was strong opposition because of the previously mentioned constraints. However, we are mindful that despite the many constraints and problems within the site given, that we are here today to try and decide least bad options, and that if some development has to take place within our boundaries, then we would extremely reluctantly concede that Limpstone 14 might be a logical one for allocation because of its proximity to Goodmoors. We would support it if Exmouth councillors felt it would be appropriate for them to meet their needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. I have next, for the first time today, the landowner or developer, Mr. Collier. Are you with us? Welcome to the Lion's Den. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. I am Simon Collier of Collier Planning, and I'm speaking on behalf of Eagle Investments South West Limited, which owns this land to the south of Hullen Road, Exmouth, identified as Limp 14. The site adjoins the northeastern boundary of the current local plan W147 mixed-use allocation at Goodmoors, which is currently under construction. Eagle Investments South West Limited supports the officer recommendation to propose the site to be allocated for a housing development. The site is available for development. It is also within a sustainable location adjacent to the existing settlement boundary of Exmouth and of a size that would mean it could be developed quickly and would be capable of forming part of the council's 5-year housing land supply. Access to the site could be achieved from its western boundary through the adjacent Goodmoors development, the adjacent phase of which is within the same ownership. The site could therefore be developed as a natural extension to the Goodmoors site. For this reason, it would be more logical for the site to be identified as a standalone allocation rather than as part of a wider allocation. The site would still be capable of being master planned in a way that gives consideration to the wider area if other land nearby was also allocated. But importantly, it could be delivered without any reliance on other sites. The site is not within the nationally important national landscape, formerly AONB, and neither is it within any current local plan green wedge designation. The landowners are working with a local SME house builder, and if allocated, the site would be delivered utilising local trades and local supply chain where feasible, ensuring that the allocation of the site would offer greatest benefit to the local economy. We therefore request your support for the officer's recommendation to propose the site as an allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. Councillors Young and Ingham in committee again. I'm seeing a theme emerging here. Okay, in which case then, we're in committee. Councillor Ingham.
It was interesting what Mr. Roberts said to us, wasn't it, Chair? You know, best of the worst, quoting Ed Freeman back at himself. That's quite funny. But it's accurate, you know. We look at that. The green wedge, no. Coastal protection area, no. National landscape, no. Okay, that must be common sense, wouldn't it be? What I suggest in the next few days, if you know where Coles is, you go up to Coles, you park in their drive and you look over the gate. This is a beautiful pasture and there are ancient trees there. And it's absolutely stunning. But apparently, we need to build here. I'll leave it at that to Councillor.
All I can say is it's the least worst. With access off Goodmoors Farm, I don't know if we can insist on that, but the developers are suggesting that. But access onto Hullen Road would be a no-no. I'm not going to make a recommendation at this point.
Councillor Howell.
I recommend we accept this site as everyone said. It's the least of the worst. They're all worst, but nevertheless, it's the least of the worst, I suppose.
Do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Levine, I saw first. Does anybody else wish to speak on this site? Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I'll just agree this is the least worst option. The fact it's adjacent to Goodmoors suggests that it's going to be possible to have some kind of access through that, which potentially gets you out onto Dinon Way. There is a potential here for a cycle route. I'm going to keep banging on about these, which could then go through Goodmoors, join onto Dinon Way, and then you'd have access through Marley Road, the old Marley Road, down towards the town. So that one, yeah, it is the least worst. It does have some sustainable connections, I think.
Any other speakers? No? Okay, in which case we move to a vote then. We have a proposal to move this forward for allocation from Councillor Howe, whose name I forgot for a moment there, seconded by Councillor Levine. Those in favour? 6. Those in favour, nice and high, please. Oh, that is 5. Those against? 2. Those abstaining? Oh, sorry, 3. I think I saw Colin. Did you vote against? Can we just make sure hands are nice and high, please? Those abstaining? 2. That, I believe, then is carried. Yeah. Okay. We're going to make a slight change to the running order at this point, and we're going to go to Lympstone 13, as it's immediately next door to Lympstone 14, and for some reason appears right at the end of the Exmouth sites. So we'll do Lympstone 13. It's not proposed for allocation. The only speaker we have registered is Councillor Young. Do you want to speak now or in committee? In committee, Councillor Ingham, in committee. Okay, in committee then, does anybody have anything to add beyond the officer's recommendation? Or can we just move on? Councillor Ingham?
As a local resident, let alone councillor, given the choice, do we build in a green field across the road? Do we build there? Pull down a garden centre? I say pull down the garden centre. I'd rather do that than build in some of the beautiful green fields. I'll leave it at that. Do you recommend?
Is that a proposal, Councillor Ingham? No?
I'm telling you what I believe most people will say. I don't expect people in this committee to agree with me, but I think it's far better to build houses on that site than to ruin a green field that we can avoid.
Would mean losing jobs, of course, but there we go. Councillor Young.
I disagree with my fellow ward councillor. I must declare an interest. I shop there, and it's a very good garden centre. But there are other garden centres available.
I was about to say that.
I would suggest that we should keep the garden centre as a garden centre. Thank you.
Was that a proposal?
If you insist.
A proposal to move on from Councillor Young. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hayward, was that, or do you wish to speak?
I wish to speak. I mean, we've entered new territory now because effectively by approving or including Lympstone 13, effectively we've excluded Lympstone 9 on the other side of the road. Now with a pedestrian crossing, you've got cycle access all the way through because you can go right across the road, across a pedestrian crossing, nice and safe for pedestrians, nice and safe for cyclists, down through 13 into Goodmoors Farm. So perhaps that one needs to come back at the tail end, and that gets us on that. And this is the challenge we're going to have. By agreeing one, effectively, you've opened up scope for another. And that's how we're going to have to deal with this piecemeal fashion. It's all very well putting them back, but they're going to have to come back again for inclusion. with then the knowledge of doing something. And Councillor Ingham, you raised a valid point. Whichever order you do it in, it's going to have repercussions. There's ripples from each of these decisions going forwards. And as soon as you agree, like, for example, 9, then you can say, well, now you could do 10, because you can join up that with a little road there. This is how we're going to have to do it. And it's a slow, tortuous process, and we're going to have lots of these meetings, people giving up lots of time. But anyway, digressing on this one, I know I talked about this garden centre. I'm sure it's a lovely garden centre. I think on this case, there's bigger fish to fry. Defer it, and if we are desperate at the end for 25 and the owner wishes to give up their garden centre and build houses on it, then we keep it in our back pocket. Thank you.
Was that seconding? Yeah, okay. Are there any other speakers on this site? It's worth pointing out that actually by allocating 14, we've created pedestrian and cycle access to 9 potentially, but there we go, by the by. Any other speakers on 13? No, okay, in which case we have a proposal to move on from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Hayward. Those in favour? Oh yeah, Colin. Yeah. Okay, 9 in favour, any against? Any abstentions? Very good, closest to a unanimous decision we've had in a while. Okay, in which case then that brings us back to the agenda, and I think I'm right in saying back to Limpstone 17. And I have, again, the two ward members, Councillors Young and Ingham. Do you wish to speak now or in committee? Committee, okay. But I do have Councillor Hookway from outside of committee. Is that right? No, that can't be right. Exmouth 17, yes, sorry, that's an error. In which case then we're in committee. Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Howe.
Move on, Chair.
Proposal?
Yep.
Any seconding? Councillor Young, does anybody wish to speak? No, okay. Proposal to move on from Councillor Howe, seconded by Councillor Young. Those in favour? That is unanimous. Exmouth 7 then. I have Councillor Chapman.
Right, Chair, I have to say I find it very, very depressing listening to the comments here and the number of houses. There's nothing about the quality of life or infrastructure. It's just housing and numbers. And I really think if you're doing a local plan, you ought to think about the people that live there. I find it really annoying. Right. Bystock Court is a listed building with the grounds. We can't really build anything there because you can't get at the land because it's privately owned and you won't get permission. We've asked this council to make it a conservation area because a lot of the buildings have been really, really well preserved for the modern day living, and we're still waiting on that. But I would like to say, at this point, north of Exmouth, up in Brixington, we have hardly any infrastructure, and we've had so many estates built. Goodmore's Farm being a prime example where the public, after 3 consultations, put forward requests, playing field, clubhouse and shops, and we've got absolutely nothing. Just sit here and listen to you putting forward a field opposite, which is right on the boundary of Lympstone, and Lympstone's miles away, and saying, well, it's opposite Goodmore's. They haven't even got a shop there. I've got 5,000 residents that have to go 1.5 miles to get a pint of milk. Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to speak at that point because I really resent the implication that any of us here don't care about our community's quality of life.
I
don't care
didn't
about
say
our
that,
residents'
Chair.
quality.
I said I
Respectfully,
found
Councillor
it
Chapman,
disappointing.
I'm speaking. Thank you.
Very hard.
I really resent the implication from you or from anyone else that anybody on this committee, anybody on this authority doesn't care about our residents, doesn't care about seeing infrastructure delivered. We do. We live here too. We're East Devon residents just as much as everyone else is, just as much as you are, Councillor Chapman. We care as well. We are bound by a system that is not fit for purpose when it comes to delivering appropriate infrastructure alongside houses, alongside new jobs. We are all in agreement with that. Equally, we have a job to do, or the government will step in, they will send the planning inspectorate down, and they will do it for us with no regard for what anybody thinks whatsoever. You'll see on every single slide that has come up in this presentation so far, the page reference for the Regulation 18 consultation feedback report that came to this committee in July last year, because I asked that that page reference be on those slides, because the feedback that we have got from those consultations from the community is important. I don't know about other councillors on this committee. Going through these agendas, I have spent countless hours going back, not only through our officer reports, but through that consultation feedback as well, through all of the other documents. I promise we care. With that said, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for making that point so clearly. I really would urge any councillor here not to use this committee as a platform for their next election campaign, because it's not appropriate, please. Thank you, Councillor Chapman. I don't recall some councillors speaking so passionately and vociferously when Hawkchurch Parish, which is sandwiched between 3 areas of outstanding natural beauty, was covered in solar panels. Are those residents not entitled to their way of life, their view, their tranquility? No, because this is, as the Chair has pointed out, is a national crisis. Also, for every person who's living in substandard accommodation, in slum dwellings, sofa surfing, are they not entitled to have a house, security of tenure, a roof over their home? It's all very well for people who've lived here, who have mortgage-free properties, to say, I want my standard of living maintained. But if you're living in a house and it's not fit for purpose, you want somewhere to live. And that's the challenge we are tasked with as a committee. So we're all working together. And speeches like that, Councillor Chapman, are offensive to me. They're probably offensive to every committee member. And I'm not sure if you've served on this committee, but you would have had to make decisions like this too. There are no easy choices. There are never going to be. We have a job to do, as the Chair has said. So on this one, however, I entirely agree with the proposal. You know, Bystock Court, for all of its history and its checkered history, I don't think this is appropriate for development. So I entirely agree with the recommendation that we just move past it, discount it, and move on. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Howe, was that seconding?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to second that.
Okay, we have a proposal then to move on in line with officer recommendation from Councillor Hayward, seconded by Councillor Howe. I haven't asked if you agree yet, committee. Ward members, do you have anything to add, or? Sorry, yes, you're quite right, not a ward member. As a committee member, do you have anything to add?
Within 10 seconds. It's just a conundrum I want to point out, Chair, is that let's have a look here. Green Wedge, no. Coastal Protection Area, no. National Landscape, no. However, there is an importance with a Grade 1 listed building. It seems that that is more important in a strategic planning committee than planning policy. From the previous local plan going into the emerging local plan. I'm not impressed. Just reminding you all.
I think I would point out, and I've just checked with Mr. Freeman to my left, listed buildings do have special protection in law above and beyond that which is afforded by the countryside or by local planning policy. That's not a decision that we can change. That's down to the Secretary of State.
Chair, that's a big area.
Yes, and Grade 1 listed buildings have special significance. Am I being corrected?
2 according to this.
Oh, Grade 2. I stand corrected then. Grade 2. I mean, either way, they still have special significance in national policy, which goes above and beyond local planning policy. That's just dems the rules, as the young people would say. That being said, then we have. I am a young person, yes. So there we go. We have a proposal from Councillor Hayward to move on, seconded by Councillor Howe. Those in favour? It's nearly unanimous. Those against? And those abstaining? Okay, that brings us then to Exmouth 21, land east of Bystock Court. Councillor Chapman, do you have anything to say? Can I suggest, just because it gets us to the end of a section, that we do this one and then take 5? Just because it makes me slightly happier with my spreadsheet. We will, yes, Brian, not yet.
Will it be today?
Yeah. Yes, Councillor Bailey, I can assure you we will have a lunch break today. Councillor Chapman.
Right. This one is really sandwiched between 2 large housing estates, both of which has no infrastructure, a lot of wildlife, a lot of badgers, and it's still got underground springs coming down, which is why in this part of Exmouth, up in Brixton, part of Flipstone, we do have these underground springs, which Councillor Howe, I'm sure, knows all about, after the Goodmoors Farm, which is where they're having a lot of trouble at the moment. And it's a good nature reserve. So I would go with the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Speakers from committee. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to endorse what Councillor Chapman's just said. This area is within the curtilage of the Grade 2 listed building. There is also within this area Old Bystock Village, which is one of the oldest privately owned villages in the entire country. So it's historical significance, and I'm very pleased that it's not recommended for development. Thank you very much, Chair.
Was that proposal to move on, Councillor Bailey?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Young?
Move on.
Okay, any other speakers? No, in which case we have a proposal from Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Young, to move on. Those in favour? Those, no, not quite unanimous. Those against? And those abstaining? Okay, there we go. We move on. Having consulted, you'll be pleased to hear, Councillor Bailey, that I've decided lunch will be now instead of later on. So we will break for just over half an hour, and committee will reconvene at 20 to 2.